Thanks for being here today. We wanted to talk a little bit about the addition to the MBR that came up kind of at the last minute in that process, and some of our concerns and the need for ongoing regulation in this area. So, first of all, just to refresh, the rule which was voided in the amendment, this came in as part of the omnibus amendment in Finance Committee, and is in the version of the MBR which passed the House, is Rule 111-3-05. And the rule covers the disclosure of activity by corporations, nonprofits, and unions in their independent expenditure campaigns. So when a third party seeks to influence the outcome of an election and spends money in that endeavor, the rule covers the reporting requirements, disclosure of who's paid for communications, as well as putting in place some rules about who can make those type of expenditures. When the rule came in, the process was very questionable from the beginning. The document that we were given, which provided information about what was in the omnibus amendment, actually had a significant typo in it, saying that it was Rule 11-3-05, which was being voided, and that rule deals with the licensure of real estate appraisers. So when we looked at the amendment itself, and when we looked at this rule, it was obviously a very different rule that was being voided. So there was no discussion when the amendment came in about what the content of the rule was that was being voided. As we found out more about what this rule would do and what the lack of the rule would do in terms of spending in elections in Ohio, we started asking questions of members of the majority. You know, what are you doing here? What are you hoping to accomplish? Most of the people that I talked to during that day and a half or so that we had before the bill came to the floor for a vote didn't really seem to know that this was even happening in the bill. I spoke with a bunch of different members of the majority caucus and said, what are you doing? Why is this in here? And people told me that it had not been discussed within their caucus, and they weren't really aware that this was in the MBR at that point. And then when we spoke with folks in leadership, we got some interesting responses about what the purpose was of voiding this rule. So we got arguments about trying to level the playing field in a couple of specific areas and saying that all those other provisions with respect to disclosure and reporting are still covered in statute. We were not provided with any actual citations in terms of statute which would still cover this area. And because the rule was promulgated after Citizens United, to make sure that there was clarity about what could still be enforced after portions of the underlying law became unenforceable, I don't believe that there is a specific area in statute without these clarifying rules in place because of Citizens United. So I think there's a gap there. I'm not sure that this is covered elsewhere in statute, and the majority hasn't provided references for us as to how that would still be covered, although they, I think, continue to say that those disclosure and reporting provisions would still be in place. Obviously important when people are making decisions about how they want to vote, that they know who is paying for communications, and they can try to sort out the different things that are being said in the conduct of campaigns. So the other things that we were told about why this rule should be voided were references about a level playing field. So I was given an example, well, what if there's a non-citizen who's a union member? And the example was, what if there's a U.S. citizen who's an a Mexican citizen who's an SEIU member, and they contribute to the PAC, and that money gets spent here? That's unfair if corporations that are foreign-owned can't spend money to influence elections. That, I think, is ridiculous in a couple of ways, not least of which is the fact that to be able to contribute to SEIU's PAC, those members have to check a box that says they are a U.S. citizen. So that argument did not make sense to me. The other argument that was given to us is that the state has a contract with its employees who are union members, and therefore if a union that has a contract with the state can make political expenditures, a company that has a contract with the state or gets a tax break should be able to. This was what they were telling us about this level playing field issue. There's a fundamental difference between a contract between the state and its employees, which the state is required by law to have, and contracts which are awarded based on a process that involves discretion. So tax breaks, contracts with the state where decision makers are using discretion about how to spend the state's resources. That is an area where we have to be very, very careful that there's no quid pro quo relationship where people are not spending money in elections to show their gratitude for contracts that they've received from decision makers at the state level. So these provisions that are in the rule are important for protecting the integrity of our policy process and our political process in the state of Ohio, and we think it's important that the rules be clear as we're heading into an election. I also find it very interesting that this rule, the proposal to void this rule, came just about a week after Governor Kasich went to Las Vegas to meet with Sheldon Adelson, who is one of the largest contributors to super PACs in the country. So meeting with a major donor who makes independent expenditures, and then a week later the majority comes back and says, we don't really think there need to be rules that govern independent expenditures. It's troubling. I think it could seriously impact people's ability to have faith in our decision-making process and in our election process, and we need to have rules in place. So I'm going to turn it over to Representative Carney.
Thank you, Representative Phillips. Well, let's cut to the chase about what we're talking about here. State contracts, state incentives, taxpayer money, liquor profit money that is being turned over to businesses and others who are essentially getting the taxpayers' benefits, their money to do contracts in the state or to create jobs in the state, and the peddling of campaign cash to those individuals.